What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're having a look at Gukesh D's latest and greatest game in round number 10 of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. And this one was a shocker. I mean, Gukesh D on move 1, throwing a curveball with the move 1d6. Then he throws in the good old-fashioned Ben Feingold counterattack with the move f6. And then finally, to top it off, he sacrifices his knight with the move knight takes g3. I mean, this game was just unbelievable. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, Gukesh D's opponent, Max Waterdam, the very strong Grandmaster, he opens 1e4, and here Gukesh, instead of going e5, c5, or any of the main lines in his opening repertoire, he does go for the move 1d6, heading for likely a Pirc defense, a modern defense, something along those lines, and Gukesh mixing things up, playing for a win as black. You gotta love it. Now here, white, the main line, of course, is 2d4, trying to get that beautiful pawn center, but instead here on move 2, g3 is the move, intending the fianchetto of that light squared bishop on the long diagonal. How is Gukesh going to respond? Well, I expected either g6 or knight f6, heading for a Pirc defense or a modern defense, but instead we have the move c5, transposing back to a Sicilian defense. It's as if white opened 1e4, black went c5, then white went g3, and then black went d6. Very interesting stuff. All right, now, bishop g2, the fianchetto of that light squared bishop as promised, and here Gukesh does go g6, heading for, something in the spirit of the dragon Sicilian. All right, now white finds a very strong response to counter this move g6 from black. He goes for the move c3, intending d4, and already I'm not sure I've ever seen this exact position on the chessboard. I certainly haven't analyzed it here on this channel, Dr. Mike Chess. All right, now Gukesh, bishop g7, the fianchetto of his own. Now knight to e2, very interesting, opting not to go knight f3, instead knight to e2, keeping that long diagonal open for that light squared bishop. Now Gukesh, knight c6, getting his own knight into play. And finally, white does go d4, gaining control of that center. And already on move 6, white already has a very significant advantage in this opening, which shouldn't be that much of a surprise. I mean, Gukesh actually went 1d6 right in the opening, so he wasn't really fighting for equality. He was trying to get a weird, imbalanced middle game where he could outplay his very strong but lower rated opponent. Now we have c takes d4, then c takes d4, then knight f6, putting pressure on that weak pawn on e4. Of course, it is defended for now, so white has nothing to worry about. And with that in mind, he just goes knight b to c3, continuing development. Now here, Gukesh, he castles, and white probably should castle, but instead of doing that, here, Max Waterdam, showing his flair, he plays the very interesting move h3, guarding that g4 square, stopping knight g4 and bishop g4 ideas, and also setting up bishop e3 without having to worry about, again, that knight g4 idea, putting pressure on that bishop. All right, now, Gukesh, what's it going to be? Are you going to fight for the center with perhaps e5 or something else? No, he is not. Instead, he goes bishop d7, maintaining maximum flexibility with his pawn structure. Perhaps the idea is he wants to go for a very fast rook to c8, maybe a6, b5, maybe a5, maybe queen to a5, and so on. Whatever he's doing, he's going for a very active play on the queen side as soon as possible. Now here, Max Waterdam, short castles is the move. And then here, Gukesh, what's it going to be? How are you going to make use of this very flexible move? Bishop d7. Is a piece going to c8? Well, it turns out that is not the case. The strongest moves here include rook c8, a5, queen to a5, and so on. But instead, we have the move rook to b8. Very interesting. Gukesh trying to gain control of that b5 square, intending a very fast b5 advance, maybe even b4, trying to drive back that knight on c3. Now here, Max Waterdam, bishop to e3. Again, making use of that move h3 earlier, gaining control of that g4 square before going bishop to e3. And now Gukesh, as promised, b5 is the move, finally gaining space on the queen side. Gukesh is just going for it. And now here, where should white go? The strongest moves include rook b1, b3, rook c1, rook e1, and a3. In the game, b3 chosen, the idea being if black goes b4, then you can go, say, knight a4 or somewhere else, and the pawn on b4 is being sufficiently blockaded by the white pawn on b3. And here, Gukesh, sure enough, he does go b4, putting the question to the knight. And now the big question, where should that knight be going? It turns out there aren't a whole lot of good squares, b5 obviously being covered by the rook. With that in mind, line, where else can it go? Well, you can go back to b1, but that is a very passive square for that knight. You can also go to a4, but it would be a little bit out of play there. And finally, you can go to d5. However, black has the option of trading on d5 immediately, and that may not be something white wants to do in this position. Now here, it turns out white does go knight to a4, but this turns out to be a little bit of a mistake. Instead, the immediate knight to d5 was actually the right response after all. Instead, knight a4 on the board, and now Gukesh, he finds a very precise move in this position to continue fighting back in this opening. He goes for the move e6, gaining total dominance of all these squares in the center of the board from f5 to c5. Now white, obviously, that pony on a4 is very misplaced, so with that in mind, knight b2 is the move, getting the pony off the edge of the board. The pony on the rim is very, very dim. On b2, it's still not very good, but it is a little bit better, and it does have access to those c4 and d3 squares. But here, Gukesh, a5, gaining space on the queen side, bolstering his pawn, threatening maybe a4 at some point later in the game. Gukesh continues to fight back in this game. Now here, white again has a lot of different options. His main problem is his queen and the rooks on a1 and f1 are very passive. With that in mind, moves like queen d2, rook c1, and rook to e1 all make a lot of sense. However, instead of that, here, white does go a4, gaining space on the queen side, and this turns out to be a very significant mistake because here, Gukesh, the world champion of chess, he can simply take on a3. B takes a3 is the move, opening up the b file, and now look at this. That rook on b8 is just perfectly placed in this game, and Gukesh really is starting to take over in this game. All right, now, of course, white has to do something about that pawn on a3, and here, Max Waterdam, he does take it. Rook takes a3 played in the game, but now here, Gukesh has a lot of different options, again, to continue piling on the pressure. Now, according to Stockfish, the strongest plan here for black is queen to e7, intending rook f to c8, with those two rooks on the b8 and c8 squares slicing down the board. Now, instead of that here, knight b4 chosen in the game, also a very active idea. The knight jumps down, maybe the queen goes to perhaps c7 or b6, perhaps the other rook comes out, and so on. And again, black is trying to play on the queen side with those pawns on e6 and d6, covering all of these key central squares. All right, now here, Max, what's it going to be? It turns out queen d2 here is the strongest response, setting up bishop h6 ideas. Instead, knight to c3 chosen in the game, finding a better square for the knight, but overall, this knight not doing a whole lot on c3 either. Now here, Gukesh, bishop b5 is the move, putting pressure on that rook on f1. Of course, the bishop is also under attack by the knight. White is going to have the option of trading on b5, but even if white does that, black is going to be just fine. His knights are very well placed, putting a lot of pressure in the white position, and even despite being down the bishop pair, white's bishops would not be doing a whole lot. So bishop b5 is a very playable move, but instead of knight takes b5 here, Max Waterdam just goes rook to e1, getting his rook finally off that f1 square out of the attack and setting up various d5 and e5 ideas. Now here, Gukesh, he finally decides it is time to strike in the center. He has had enough of the flexible pawn structure on d6 and e6. So with that in mind here, d5 is the move, gaining space. And what's it going to be for white? Does he allow d takes e4? Does he go e5? Does he take on e5 himself? What's it going to be? Well, it turns out here white goes for the French defense pawn structure with the move e5, driving back the knight. Gukesh goes knight d7, and now finally we have that French defense pawn structure in the center of the board with those pawns on d4, e5, e6, and d5. Now here, finally, it is finally time for white to trade that knight for the bishop on b5. White simply has to get rid of that light squared bishop. It is just too strong, too important. But Max Waterdam, he makes a big mistake. He goes queen d2. Now, we talked about this move earlier in this video, setting up the battery of the queen and the bishop on the long diagonal. I mean, I can draw arrows right. This always makes a lot of sense in most positions when black has fianchettoed that bishop on g7. However, here, black simply has the option of going bishop a6, keeping that bishop alive. Gukesh finds the idea, and here Gukesh is sitting pretty. I mean, it is not going to be easy for white to attack the black king on g8, and meanwhile, with the queen side opening up, Gukesh is going to have plenty of counterplay. Now, Granted, the computer says here the game is roughly even, maybe even a microscopic advantage for white, but overall, in a practical game, attacking the black king is going to be very, very hard, and black is going to have a lot of counterplay on these open B files and C files, and honestly, I think most grandmasters would rather be black here as opposed to white. All right, rook to c1 is the move by Max Waterdam, trying to get his pieces into play. And now we have rook c8. Now, again, with the white rooks on a3 and c1, it is going to be very hard to attack on the king side, meaning white is sort of playing defensively here, having a little bit less space on the queen side due to the pawn structure in the center and on the queen side. Now here, Max Waterdam, rook a to a1, dropping his other rook back, defending the rook on c1 with the other rook preemptively. Not a bad idea, but again, Gukesh just piling up the pressure. Queen b6, sliding out with the queen. What is white going to do about that? Well, here he goes. Knight c to a4, jumping up with the knight, pressuring the queen on b6. Of course, the queen is going to go back. Where's it going to go? In the game, Gukesh does go queen to b8, sliding immediately back with the queen. Now we have bishop f1, trying to trade off those bishops, but as those bishops go, white's pawn structure on the king side is going to be very, very weak. And honestly, white needs the light square bishop alive, as number one, white has his central pawns on dark squares, and number two, without that bishop, it is going to be very hard to attack the black king. So here, Gukesh, he just trades on f1, bishop takes f1, king takes, and then here, this is where the game really heats up, especially from the world champion's perspective. Here he plays the good old-fashioned Ben Feingold counterattack with the move f6, opening up the Feingold f-file and putting pressure on that pawn on e5. And as that f-file opens up, that good old-fashioned Ben Feingold rook on f8 is going to be slicing down the board and opposing the white king on f1. Things are getting dangerous for the first player. All right, now we have e takes f6, then knight takes f6, then we trade some rooks here. Rook takes c8, queen takes c8, and here, white, it turns out he's already got a very difficult task. He has to find a very precise move in this position to hang on, and it turns out the right way forward is knight to c3, guarding the e4 square, discouraging a knight to e4 advance. However, Max Waterdam, he misses the idea. He is simply not on Gukesh D's level in this game, and he goes rook to c1. Now, this move makes a lot of sense to me. It's probably what I would have played if I was playing white here. I mean, obviously, you bring your rook to the c file, you attack the queen, boom, boom, bang, gain a tempo. But the problem here is black doesn't have to move the queen. And if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the very cool sequence for black right here. And again, your one hint is black does not have to move the queen in this position. So that is your hint. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this one featuring Gukesh D, the world champion. All right, here, black, of course, he goes knight to e4, jumping in with the knight. What is the idea? If you take the queen on c8, you take the queen on d2, with tempo on the king. For example, rook takes c8 is a mistake. Knight takes d2 is the right move. You hit the king, and if white takes the knight, then you take the rook, and look at this. Here, black has two minor pieces and the rook versus the three minor pieces of white. Black is up the exchange. He's up the rook for the extra knight of white. That would be devastating. So way back right here, after the move knight d4, you have to move your queen out of the attack. Queen d1 chosen in the game by Max Waterdam. That is the right idea. And now it may look like white has everything under control. Yes, black has a lot of pressure on that pawn on f2, but that is defended by the bishop and the king. And beyond that, white is still putting pressure on the black queen on c8. So what is Gukesh going to do about this? What does he have in mind? Well, I'll tell you. Here, Gukesh, he plays the move queen to b8, piling up pressure on that weak pawn on g3. And now, look at this. Black is actually threatening knight takes g3 outright as the pawn on f2 is pinned to the king. For example, if white wastes a move, let's say, I don't know, h4, then knight takes g3, and again, the pawn on f2 would be pinned to the king. So here, in this position, obviously, white's going to move the king. He goes king to g1, but Gukesh, does this madman slow down even one teensy tiny bit? No, he does not. He plays the move knight takes g3, blowing open the kingside. He is going for the attack. Now, what is the idea behind this move? Has Gukesh lost all his marbles? No, he has not. Well, turns out, white, if you take on g3, this did not happen in the game, but if you do it, if you go f takes g3, the queen comes crashing in, the rook controls the f file, you have to go to h1, then you have queen takes h3, and so on, and the attack is just so devastating that black is going to be effectively winning in this position. For example, king g1, rook f3, intending rook g3, and so on. I mean, the attack is just too much, and black is going to be winning. So with that in mind here, instead of that, on move 31, knight to c5 chosen by Max Waterdam. So Max, recognizing you can't do anything about that knight, but here Gukesh says, you know what? The knight, it did its job. Knight to f5. We retreat back, and now Gukesh is up a single pawn. The white king side has been blown open. I mean, white is in just a tremendous amount of trouble right here. All right, white goes queen g4, flying out with the queen. He is trying his best to defend. What is black going to do? Queen to e8, supporting that pawn on e6 immediately. Of course, white was putting pressure on it, so the queen does need to be there defending. Now here, white, knight b d3. He centralizes his knight. Now Gukesh, turns out the strongest move here, according to the engine, this is not an easy move to make, is h5, putting pressure on that queen on g4 immediately. Instead of that, in the game, knight to c6 chosen. And now here, white goes knight to f4, and in this position, Gukesh, he simply plays the move, bishop takes d4, piling up pressure. He's now up 2 complete pawns in this position. He has those French defense pawns on e6 and d5. And I was very shocked by this. But in this position right here, Max Waterdam, he actually resigns to the world champion Gukesh D. Now, resigning is not necessary. If this was an online blitz game, for example, obviously white would not be resigning. There's plenty to play for, but I guess he just said, you know what? Gukesh is just on fire. We're down 2 pawns. I'm getting outplayed. There's just no need to, carry this on any longer. And I guess he just decided to resign. But to me, this still looks very, very premature, especially for a Grandmaster level game. So comment down below if you think this was a premature resignation by Max Waterdam. Like, what do you think happened here? Why do you think he resigned so early? Personally, I think it's very premature, even against Gukesh, even against the world champion, but I digress. Obviously, Max Waterdam, a much better player than I will ever be, so, maybe he knows what he's doing. So anyway, in this position, Max Waterdam resigns to Gukesh. What a game from round number 10 of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know the drill. Smash that like button, and again, comment down below what you thought of this game, especially the premature resignation, the weird opening with Gukesh with d6 and then c5, and finally starting with the good old-fashioned Ben Feingold counterattack with the move 25 f6, and then culminating in the crazy move 30 knight takes g3, Gukesh going for the attack. So comment down below what you thought of all of these crazy moves by the world champion, and if you want to see more Gukesh action, check out this video right here where I cover his round number 9 game of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. Again, if you want to see more incredible Gukesh D action, and by the way, Gukesh did win that game, so check that game out, and I'll see you in the next video.